Hey guys, it's Ashley and welcome to day one of my 12 days of something. BOOKMAS videos? I'm not really sure what I'm calling it, but that's what I'm doing. I'm putting up 12 videos, one a day from December 20th to December 31st. And this is day one. Surprise! I never told anybody I was doing this. I just had a lot of videos that I wanted to make at the end of the year, and I felt like doing a sort of 12 days of videos marathon kind of thing would be the best way to do it. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you the rest of the books that I read in 2020. So normally every year I make all the books I've read so far in 2020 midway through the year, and at the end of the year I recap the rest of the books that I read from August into December. But since I haven't read anything in December and I'm filming this on December 3rd or 4th, I believe it is, I only have August through November, which will work just fine. So I'm going to be sharing with you 31 books today, some of which you have already heard me talk about loads of times and I will not spend any time on, and some of which I haven't spoken about since I did that wrap up. So without further ado, let's get started. Also, I hope you love my ugly Christmas sweater, even though it's not really ugly, it's pretty cute. So first up for the rest of the books that I read in 2020, we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which is honestly one of the outliers in all of these books. This is the only classic other than Emma by Jane Austen that I have read this year. This book was so great. I really hate that I took so long to read it. I love this story. I love the movie. I love it. I like it more than I thought I was going to, and that's all I can say for it. Next up, I read Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, which was okay. I definitely would not reread it, and though I did enjoy most of it, there were some points, especially toward the end, where I was like, that just doesn't sound like it adds up. So I wasn't super crazy about it, but I did enjoy it for the most part, and I don't regret reading it, so there's that. The next book that I read in August was one that I have been meaning to get to for so long now, and that was The Chronicles by Riordan. I ended up reading The Red Pyramid first because it's the first book, and I read a couple of things in between the series as I kind of split it up throughout the month, so we'll be getting to that, but The Red Pyramid was the first book. I did really enjoy this series. I'm not mad that it took me so long to get to it. I kind of am surprised that I didn't enjoy it as much as I did now back when I was younger and tried to read it. I think now I just have a much more open mindset, and it didn't really bother me that these stories don't follow Percy as much as apparently it did when I was a kid. I have no idea. Then I read The Vanishing Half by Bennett, mostly because this had been getting so much buzz when it first came out, and now I feel like I hear nothing about it. But regardless, the story was still really good. I did enjoy my time reading it, and yes, I am still trying to convince my mom to finally read some of these books. She literally bought copies of everything that I'm telling her to read, and then she won't read them. Why? But yeah, this is an adult contemporary story, and it's really good. It's about two twins who live very different lives from one another, and it comments on a lot of things about society, about race, about just all of that kind of stuff. So if you are looking for a good adult book to dive into, read this one. It's really good. And it's being turned into an HBO show, I think, which is honestly probably going to be really good to see like on the screen. I feel like this story would translate really well that way. Then I was on that weird Umbrella Academy kick, so I read volumes 1 and 2 of the Umbrella Academy comic, and then just never made it to volume 3. I'm not really sure what happened, but that's what I did. And then after that, I read A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro, which I listened to on audiobook actually by one of your recommendations. I can't remember who it was, but thank you. As I was crocheting my little heart out, which I haven't done recently, and I have so much yarn, so I should probably get back into that. But I really love this story, and I have been meaning to get to The Last of August, which is the second book in this series, for so long now. It's literally been like months, and I've been meaning to get to it. And just, I haven't yet, and it makes me mad because I really want to read it. This is a Sherlock Holmes and John Watson story following their sort of great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren as they are going to a boarding school, and there are murders, and it's really a good time. Then after my little detour there, I finally got back around to the Chronicles. I read book 2, The Throne of Fire, and book 3, The Serpent's Shadow. The series was really good in the end. I really enjoyed it, and because I read this when I did, I was able to get every single clue right in the Egyptian mythology category one night on Jeopardy. Like literally every single clue I got right because I thought back to these stories and they helped me. So thank you, Riordan, for helping me in Jeopardy, even though I was just sitting on my couch and listing off the answers and everybody was telling me to shut up. Also, rip Alex Trebek. Oh my god. Rest in peace, my dude. And then I attempted to read Rebecca, which I'm not going to spend any time on at all because I ended up DNFing this book. I didn't like it. I didn't even like the movie when I watched it, even though I love Lily James. And that's all I'm gonna say. After Rebecca, I felt like I needed something to get me back in that reading spirit, so I ended up rereading a book that I absolutely loved at the beginning of this year, and that was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey Mckinston. Everybody pretty much knows at this point what this is about. I'm not going to go into any explanation. I reread this for the second time in 1 year, so I think you can tell that I like it. And then the last story that I read in August, because clearly I read a lot in August, I don't know how I did that, is Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim, which was the first book in my reading books that you guys recommended to me video, which I've been meaning to do a second one of, and I haven't yet, but I still have all of your recommendations in the comments of that video, which I will look through when I go to make a second version of that. But for now, I just have the one, and this was the first book that I read for that. It was really good. I really like the sort of tailoring, sewing aspects that is involved in addition to like the fantasy and the fantastical stuff and the magic and everything like that. It's a good story, and I've been meaning to pick up the second one as usual, which is what usually happens. I pick up the first one and then I never pick up the second one, and then it's like a year later and I finally want to do it, but I don't remember anything of what happened in the first book, so it's probably gonna happen again. So now we are into my September reads, and September was also a really good month. I feel like I read a lot of really good books, but I also had some not so good books that I read, and one of those not so good books was the next one, and that was The Lost Book of the White by Cassandra Clare and Wesley Chu. Like I said in my wrap up for that month, I was just really disappointed that this did not live up to my expectations. It just was not a great story. Like, yes, I love the characters. Yes, I love being back in the Shadowhunter world, but that cannot be enough for me to be pulled through the story and enjoy myself. The plot and the pacing of this book were just god-awful, and I just did not enjoy it. And yes, I'll read the third one because, you know, I'm already 2 books in, like I might as well pick up the third one and see how it ends, but I just was not crazy about it. I just am not in love with it. I'm sorry, it just was not a good time. But right after that book, I read one of my all-time favorite books this year, which you will be seeing again in a lot of these videos upcoming, and that is Beartown by Frederick Backman. This was the second book that I picked for that reading books you guys recommended to me video. If you haven't watched that, you can go see all of my thoughts on it there, but this book was incredible. It was so good. It had me sobbing. It had me like violently like shaking from like just anger and emotional fear and outrage and just all of these things. It just is so good, and I'm so excited to continue reading more of Frederick Backman's work. I do have my grandmother told me to tell you that she's sorry, or whatever the title is of that story, because so many of you recommended I read that as well. So yeah. And after Beartown, thus began my reread of The Trials of Apollo in preparation for the Tower of Nero. I ended up reading The Hidden Oracle right after Beartown, and this was just a reread for me. I had already read this years ago, and it was just as good as I remember. Definitely one of my favorites in the story, just because Apollo is so big-headed and egotistical and absent-minded, and he's just hilarious in this story. And although I do love his character development throughout the whole series, there's a soft spot in my heart for this one. It's so good. Next up, we also have another slight disappointment for me, and that was House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. Yes, I figured out that it's House of Earth and Blood and not Crescent City. It only took me 7 videos to figure that one out and actually remember. As I mentioned in that wrap-up, though this was a really good story and I did enjoy it for the most part, there were certain things that I read that just, you know, didn't live up to my expectations. I don't know, I just wasn't as in love with it as I was the other series that she's written, and I think the reason that I wanted to pull through this story so fast was because I wanted to know what would happen to see if how I was feeling would get any better. And it didn't. It honestly, it got a little tiny bit worse. Then I read a book that I did absolutely love, and that was Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This was such a wonderful story. It hit your feelings in all of the right places. The story was endearing and emotional and heartwarming, but also, you know, touched on a lot of hard topics and hard subjects. In addition, it taught me a lot about Dia de los Muertos. Oh my god, I can't say that very fast, I'm sorry. Dia de los Muertos, and also a lot about Latinx culture. So I definitely really enjoyed this book. I love this book. So the next book that I read was The Dark Prophecy by Rick Riordan, which is the second book in the Trials of Apollo. Again, this was another reread for me in preparation for the Tower of Nero. And then I read definitely the best book that I had read this year, at the time, which was Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman, the sequel to Scythe. You all know my thoughts on this series. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I apologize for already ranting so much about it in the past, but I will not bore you to tears with more of that. So just know it was wonderful and amazing and everything that I wanted and also didn't want at the same time. Then came The Burning Maze, which is book 3 in the Trials of Apollo series, which shattered my heart into a million pieces. Even though I knew what was coming, it still hurt. Then we have the third and final book that I read for my Reading Books You Guys Recommended Me video, which was 1,000 Splendid Suns. This story was very good. It was very like heartbreaking and also heartwarming at the same time. There were just a lot of different emotions going on in there. And again, this was another one of those outlier books that I definitely would not have normally picked up had somebody not recommended it to me. So very happy that I ended up reading this one because again, just like with Cemetery Boys, I learned a lot about a different culture that I am, you know, not very well versed in. And then after that, I finally ended up finishing the audiobook for The Diviners by Libba Bray, which was a perfect read for that time of the year. It was super fall, super spooky, and also the whole 1920s setting really like had me going. Again, another book that I've been meaning to pick up the sequel to, but just haven't done it yet, and I'm kicking myself for it, so hopefully next year will be my year to catch up on sequels. And after that was a new favorite fantasy, which was Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. So many people have read this story already, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. It's a great YA high fantasy, and I'm really excited to get to book 2. It's literally on my side table, and it has been for the past month now. So again, hopefully soon I'll get to the sequel, but the first one was so good and was everything that I wanted in a YA high fantasy, and I can't wait to get to that next one. And then I finally ended up finishing the Trials of Apollo back to back with the Tyrant's Tomb and finally the Tower of Nero. Both of these lived up to my expectations so much, especially the Tower of Nero. I absolutely adore this series now, and I'm sad that I waited so long to catch up on it, but also I'm pretty happy about it because that just meant that I had everything fresh in my mind for the Tower of Nero, which definitely helped. Love this series. I love Rick Riordan's work, and I can't wait for anything else that he puts out in the future, even if it doesn't revolve around these books and the Percy Jackson world. I'm just really looking forward to it. And I'm really looking forward to the Percy Jackson TV show adaptation on Disney+. I don't know when it's gonna happen, I don't know when it's coming out, but I'm really looking forward to it. Then we have Legend Born by Tracy Deonn, which was another one of my faves this year. This was like King Arthur legend mixed with the modern world, and it was everything that I wanted and more. I cannot wait for the sequel. I am on the edge of my seat, like waiting impatiently, even though this just came out like 2 months ago and I need to chill a little bit. Yeah, if you haven't read this story, definitely like think about it. It's so good. It's so good. I have no words, it's so good. I totally forgot to mention this, but at some point I moved into the books that I read in October. Let's just move on now. Next up in October, apparently, I read The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This was my Patreon book club pick of the month, and it did not disappoint. It was everything that I wanted for that time of year in fall. It was magical and whimsical. It had a great love story. It had some like adventurous children. I don't know. I just really, really loved everything about this story. And then we've got mine and everybody's fave, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was such a touching and just like heartbreaking story. It was so good, and it was really like anxiety ridden at times for me, to be honest with you. I was really worried about what was gonna happen. The way that we moved between time periods, like back when Addie was younger and moving through time, and also like in the present day, there was just so much that we were missing through most of the story that I was so scared for it when it finally came. But it was so good. So good. Definitely one of my faves of the year. Just highly recommend this story to literally anybody. It's so good. Like, if you like fantasy, if you like contemporary, if you like historical fiction, like it literally checks off all the boxes. And then Addie took me kind of into a little bit of a slump, as I've mentioned in many videos already, so I won't talk about that too much, but my November books, which most of you would already know about if you've watched my November wrap-up that I put up, so I will go through these pretty quickly. But after that, I read Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the third book in the Nevermore series, and it did not disappoint. It was incredible. So good. Highly recommend you read this series. And that's all I'm gonna say. Then I read Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco, I think is her name. This was another Patreon book club pick, and although I wanted to like this one, I was not a huge fan. As I mentioned in that wrap up, you win some, you lose some. I wanted to like it, but there was just something about some of the dialogue, some of the tropes, some of the characters that I was just not super happy with and didn't really enjoy, so therefore was not my favorite, but I don't regret reading it. It was still a wild ride, I will say. And finally we get to the pinnacle of all books that I've read this year, which is kind of a spoiler for my top 10 books of the year, but we'll not talk about that. That book is The Toll by Neal Shusterman. This story literally dominated all of my year. Scythe Thunderhead, The Toll, everything about this story was incredible, and I'm so happy that I ended up reading it, and yeah. And so those were the rest of the books that I read in 2020. 4 months and 31 books spanning across that. I would call that a major win for me. I'm curious to know how many books you guys have read throughout the whole year or just the last like half of the year like I did here. I don't know, we all have our own reading speeds and like reading tastes, and sometimes if I'm in the mood for a fantasy, I'll read less because they're usually so big of books, but if I'm in the mood for like a contemporary, I can read like 12 of those in a month, and it's great. I hope you guys like this first video in my 12 days of, I'm just gonna call it BOOKMAS, even though Hailey does BOOKMAS and she does it a lot better than this, but I'm just gonna call it that for the sake of books and Christmas. So I hope you guys enjoyed the first video in this little marathon that I'm gonna be doing. Keep an eye out for the next 12 days because I will have bookish videos going up, all 12 of them, all the way up until the end of the year. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for this video. If you want to follow me on any of my socials, all of my handles are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you later. Bye!